Okay. Good morning, everybody. I would like to open the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 22nd of September. First of all, I'll go through 5 minutes worth of housekeeping rules. So, the meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. This meeting is being run under Alert Level 2. As such, it is compulsory to scan in before entering the meeting room. Please do so if you have not already. Social distancing is required. Everyone must stay at least 1 metre apart and 2 metres apart from people you don't work with. Mask wearing is required. Please keep your mask on for the duration of the meeting. I'll just go through the health and safety rules for the function centre. Male and female toilets are located on both the ground floor and first floor of the venue, and there's an independent disabled toilet on each floor. This is non-smoking. First aid kit is available. Defibrillator is on the ground floor next to the unisex toilets, and please be aware of all the exits points from the building. And in case of an emergency, please go to your nearest exit, and there is a safety warden and venue staff will be on site to assist. Right, for councillors online, please use your hands up function, so you should know that one by now. And if you wish to speak, and you can cast your vote in the chat box. Please email text for an amendment to the committee administrator. I think that's all right. And I think we've covered everything else. So the councillors that are attending online, we have Councillor Leonie Harpeta, Councillor Petrinas, Councillor Dingwell, Mr Armstrong, Councillor Finlay, and the Mayor will be online. So I think I've covered everything. So we will now go to the apologies. And first up, I have apologies from Councillor Bowen. Are there any other apologies? No other apologies. So I'll move the apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. So we will... we'll just vote on the hands, okay? So, sorry, just get there. So all those in favour? So that is carried. So have you covered the ones online? Thank you. Right. So I have no additional items that I'm aware of. Oh, can councillors in the room please make sure they're muted? Your devices. Yeah. Okay. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm not aware of any. No, and I'm not aware of any public comment. No, we'll move on. So we'll now move on to confirmation of the minutes. I am happy to move the minutes. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is there any comment? Okay. So all those in favour, raise their hand. So that is carried. Thank you, Hannah. And we now move on to our first item of business, which is on page 13, which is the results of the public engagement extension of the paid parking hours. And that is going to be presented by Michael and Vanuka. Welcome. So over to you when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, councillors. Just wanted to introduce Vanuka Nanukara. He's our Senior Transport Planner. He's been with the Council for almost a year now. Vanuka has prepared a short presentation to support the memo, and I'll just hand off to him.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Good morning, Madam Chair, councillors. I'll take the report as read, but we'll run through the highlights for your benefit. Next slide, please. So, Council approved charges through the LCP process to the on and off-street parking charges on the 7th of April. This involved an increase and standardisation of the fees for $1.70 per hour for the on-street car parking and $1 per hour for off-street. This was the first increase in parking charges in the city since 2015. The public responded via a 5,700 odd signature petition presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on Wednesday the 23rd of June. That led to Council undertaking a 2-week period of public engagement on the extension of paid parking hours only from the 28th of July to the 11th of August. And this engagement was marketed through a variety of means. The public was able to provide feedback through an online form on the website and through direct emails or hard copy forms available at council sites such as the iSite and front of house. Next slide, please. So 2,600 submissions were received on the online form, as well as about 100 hard copies and 25 email submissions. I have read through all of them, but I won't promise to know what was in all of them. But I guess the results contained in the report and on screen only count for the online submissions, as resourcing and timing constraints with the lockdown prevented us from adding the tally up. That being said, all the submissions are available in the report. And the general feedback was consistent across all forms of the responses. About 97% of respondents did not support the proposal. Next slide, please. As part of the engagement, we provided the respondents with the ability to provide long answers to each of their questions, or each of the questions. We thought the why behind the answers provided was critical to ensuring the right decisions are made. There was quite a significant diversity in the answers, so we provided a bit of a summary in the report of those responses, as well as direct quotes in appendices A, B and C. It's worth noting that Horizons Regional Council provided a submission which they supported the proposal. The Manawatu Chamber of Commerce, Palmy Bid and Grey Power Manawatu did not. Next slide, please. In terms of the financial implications of this proposal, the original increase and standardisation of fees plus the extended paid parking hours was expected to provide an increased revenue of $500,000 per annum. The extension of paid parking hours by itself would provide $125,000 per annum in revenue. This is assuming that lockdowns kind of thing. And I'll open up for questions.
Thank you. The Mayor has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Michael and Vanuka. This may be a question more to the finance team, where the net that we're at risk with, I think was identified just then, I think 125 or something thousand, is, as we've exceeded revenue figures for parking consistently over the number of years, is it the view of officers that this revenue could be made up?
Stuart.
Yeah, I mean, the increase in revenue was an assumption anyway, and is based on demand and I guess volume of use, as well as the fee. So the fee's not the only driver of what happens here. It's a slightly long-winded way of answering the question in saying that the revenue is variable year to year, and as you quite rightly point out, it has been increasing. And so it's almost a semi-impossible answer, because we don't really know. It's demand driven. I don't know if that's an appropriate answer or not, but that's probably where we're
Well,
at.
sorry, Madam Chair, could I rephrase it to make it easier to give you perhaps an easier way of answering it? Have we exceeded budgets with parking revenue in the past years?
Yeah, we have, and last year we expected a big drop in parking revenue and it didn't really happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vanuka and Michael. I just want to talk about consultation with the community in terms of this process. I mean, we all expected it to have a volume of engagement, but with the flavour of the consultation that's come through, has that informed you enough to be able to make the decisions that you have for this report?
Yes.
So you're happy with the tenor of the response that we got back from the community?
Happy with the what? Sorry?
The flavour.
I'll get the CFO to answer that, Councillor.
I guess just in terms of a response to that, Leonie, the decision's not ours, it's the elected members' decision. The feedback was pretty clear.
I understand that. I just wanted to understand how the officers felt about the feedback. That was all. That was my real question.
Okay.
I think the answer to it was pretty convincing.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a further question around the financial modelling, sort of picking up where the Mayor was. Understand there's a number of moving parts in the model, but if we were to assume that the only part that could move was the actual hourly fee, do we know what we would need to adjust the hourly fee to in order to fill the 125,000 gap?
Yeah, roughly 30 more cents.
Roughly 30 more cents would fill the gap. Great, thank you.
Are there any further questions, councillors? No? Okay, thank you, gentlemen. You may step down. Okay, we are now moving to the recommendation. And I'm happy to move the second part of recommendation 1 and have a seconder, Councillor Naylor. So just to be clear, that is that the following existing paid parking hours are retained. That is Thursday 8:30 to 5:30, B, Friday 8:30 to 5:30, Saturday 11:30 to 3 p.m, and Sunday no paid parking. You want to comment, Councillor?
I'm just a bit confused, Madam Chair, because what you read out was number 2, but what's on the screen is number 1.
Yes, I'm just, yep, thank you.
So it's number 2 that you're moving?
Yes, it's number 2. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Councillor. Yes, it's coming. Okay, so that's covered. So I will speak to that. Originally, when this came up to finance and performance, I was happy to tick it off. Hadn't really taken much notice of any consultation because there hadn't been any consultation done on this. Obviously, since consultation has been actioned, and it's quite clear to me that the businesses, and it's not the increase in parking that concerns me, it's the actual impact to the businesses that really concern me. When I look at parking around the town during the normal hours, on average, most of the people park in between 8 to or 9 till 5. They park less than an hour, and I think the greatest, it's about 40 minutes on average. About 80% of them park. When you start looking at the effect on the businesses after these hours, it's not a retail sector, it's more an entertainment sector after 5:30. It's the cafes and the bars and the Regent and places like that. People aren't parking for 40 minutes, they're parking for 3 hours. Like when I go out, I go to dinner, tonight I'm going to the movies, I'm going to dinner at 6 o'clock, and I was thinking that in terms, that's another $5 if I've got to pay parking till 9 o'clock. So I think that's quite significant. And where it's a destination, it's a fine line. People will say, oh, well, we won't go to Broadway for dinner. We'll go somewhere else because we don't have to pay for parking. So I'm really concerned about that impact. And the other submission that I really took notice of was the one from Brew Union. And, 6-8 years ago, Broadway was a ghost town, ghost street. And looking at Broadway now and the amount of investment that those businesses have put into the CBD, I just think with COVID, everything now is not the right time. If the businesses are having issues with parking, they will certainly come to us. So I think now this is the time for caution. So I will obviously be sorting that. So now people to speak. First up is the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm going to support your recommendation, and I think we've heard from the public pretty overwhelmingly. But I would have to say I agree with your comments about some particular submitters, and I do want to highlight the business sector. They have gone through another lot of lockdown and some more pain, and they're still going through it because we're not totally out of the woods yet. So to put what was seen as another barrier in front of them immediately now, I think would be quite foolish, especially as 97% of our public have asked us not to do this. The parking management strategy is coming up at the end of the year, early next year. That is the time to have a more rounded debate about hours and charges. The money that we've got, the whole of 125,000, I'm confident the city's rebounding reasonably well, and the staff seem to be relatively confident too that we'll be able to make that up. We have exceeded budgets year on with parking revenue. Around the also consistency, if we did go to these different hours, we'd be quite inconsistent with what our regional cities, even some metros, are doing. The Chair made a very good point. The retail sector, which then at night goes to the hospitality or entertainment sector, is very different. And the model of parking and the model of people coming in is quite different. A lot of people come in, they sometimes use public transport or taxis or Uber to come in because they're having either a meal out, a drink, or a night out. So it's all quite different, and to add another tax onto them, I think would be foolish at this stage. Again, I want to highlight the Brew Union submission, which was very well thought out. I took a lot of note on that, and as Chair said, there's been quite a lot of investment. That business alone in there is multi-million. So they have really helped, them and others have helped bring the city centre alive again. So look, I support this. I ask my colleagues to support it as well. I think it is the sensible and pragmatic thing to do at this stage, and let's have a wider and more rounded discussion with the parking strategy early next year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just very happy to support this recommendation that you've put up. I think with getting the 2,600 public submissions coming forward, I think that gave us a very clear steer. I think the broad range of submissions as well, not just from the businesses, but also from Grey Power, also from people from the churches, which meant the Sundays as well. So I think it was going to different parts of where we were coming from. Business, churches, Sundays, everything. So we really needed to look at every aspect of what we were trying to push on this. So I really think we're looking at everything along this area. Just one aspect, we also look at the staff that are working in hospitality too. This was going to really affect some of the staff in this area, so we do need to look at that too. So I'm really happy to support this proposal. Thank you, this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are now in the difficult position of choosing between leading our people and being led by our people. We have actually been spending quite a lot of time over the last couple of years talking about the levers that we have to make a difference to combat climate change. We know that we need to encourage people to get out of their cars. We need to try and get people onto public transport. We need to try and encourage active transport. And so I feel like the focus on the paid parking has been wrong this entire time. It's not actually about money. The money aspect is a lever to encourage the behaviour that we want to see in the city. And I get it. I understand that we haven't managed to convince the people. But I really don't feel that we should be giving up on the few tools that we have to encourage this behaviour change. We could compromise. We could say yes to Sundays, but no to the after hours at night, because then you wouldn't have that issue around safety for people who have to travel at night. I think if we did something like charging on the Sundays but not at nights, that would give our systems and Horizons a chance to beef up the public health system, and it could get people actually thinking about why they take their cars into town. Maybe it could be more fun to get all the kids on the bike and ride in to visit Te Manawa. It might be fun for the kids to take a bus in to meet their friends for breakfast at a cafe. I think we need to start encouraging people to think about how they use their vehicles and why. And this is one of the levers that we could have used to do that. I think if we'd done a compromise and gone for paid parking on Sundays but not on the other nights, that would be some progress. So I'm not happy to support this in its entirety, because I feel like we're just now giving up on climate change altogether, and we need to do something. So I would be happy to support parking on Sundays but not on the other days. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, it has been quite an interesting journey over the last few months on this one. Started off with unanimous support. We then got public uproar, and now we're here today. I've certainly learned a fair bit along the way in terms of where the community preference is at on this, and how there is concern in the local community around a more consistent approach to parking management being applied. And I've made a few new acquaintances, heard from a number of friends and businesses, et cetera. And I get it that people do tend to like things the way they are. They like to be able to pretend that things are free. That's only natural, but the reality is that parking in the city isn't free, and the reality is that the city is growing fast. Almy's getting bigger, we're getting busier, and we are getting more crowded, and that's why we do need to bring change to more consistently manage our on-street car parks, especially at times when they're in hot demand. So just turning to the officer's report, I do appreciate the effort that they've put in, and it's good to have those results, even though there's no surprises in there, I think, for anyone. We could have asked, would you like a free lunch? And I think we would have had overwhelming support for that proposition. Of course, we also could have asked, should we put your rates up even more? And in exchange, we'll give you less parking availability, we'll give you more cost, we'll give you a bit more congestion and a bit more pollution. Because that's a fair question as well, because that's where we end up going as a city if we don't better manage our parking as we get bigger and busier. When parking's in hot demand in the city, and we know that some of the times signaled in this change, parking is in hot demand, it needs to be managed and managed consistently. There's proven tools to do that, and they already sit in our policy box. It's around revenue diversification, around ensuring that the user has the opportunity to pay, and using price to support parking availability, which is a key driver of economic activity, and to encourage alternatives. That approach works when it's applied consistently, and I am concerned that we do have quite an inconsistent approach here where we're not actually sharing the load. We're expecting the weekday trade to subsidize the weekend and evening trade. So, while I'd be the first to acknowledge that it isn't even a remotely popular choice, and while it would be really easy to treat this as a referendum, it's not an approach that I'm prepared to take. We need a consistent approach, and a consistent approach is the best approach. The original proposal from officers delivered that consistency in managing our city center car parks. These are spaces that for too long we've pretended are free during times of high demand. And so today, I'll be voting against the recommendation and voting for keeping up with growth, for lower overall cost, for better car park availability, and yes, for a fair, reasonable, and consistent approach to managing these most coveted car parks in the heart of our city. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments. I guess my view is that I supported the officers' recommendations, which were obviously adopted by Council earlier in the year, and in a bigger sense, I still absolutely do. However, it's really challenging to look at, I guess, 97% opposition and ignore that. I think Councillor Johnson cautioned our colleagues against what the results of this consultation would be when we agreed to go back out, and very much it's exactly, I guess, as we expected, possibly stronger than we expected. And similarly, Councillor Barrett talked about holding fire a wee bit and talking about our parking management strategy, bringing this into a wider discussion, which is due to happen in the coming months. So I guess the writing's been on the wall a wee bit. My view is that I will support the recommendations that have been moved, because I think that there's probably a few flaws in our current parking management approach, and these can be teased out with a wider review. And in particular, things like the Saturday morning hours, which were actually amended to look at the introduction of a market in the CBD, and so it was to provide people access to that when actually originally the Albert Street Market was looking at moving. So we made changes with our parking hours to accommodate that so that we could encourage that in the CBD. That didn't eventuate. So in my view, that's actually something that we should fix because it's no longer there. But I also think that we need to communicate the why around why we charge for parking, why we manage parking, why we encourage turnover. And I'm not quite sure that we are, I guess, hitting the nail on the head with that communication with our community. So there is an opportunity through the parking management strategy to do that. I guess just the other thing I really want to address is the tone of some of the submissions that are coming through to council, and in particular some of these submissions where I see a rising level of aggression from some submitters. And we typically have, we've all had these conversations with each other. We've spoken about this outside of, the chamber and those kind of things. But I'm wondering at what point it needs to actually be a public discussion around our level of acceptance. Our community absolutely have the right to submit and engage with us. And, when they're passionate about an issue, they want to communicate that. But I'm also wondering where we draw the line, because it's not just us that have to put up with reading these comments, but it's our staff, it's members of the public when these are public documents. And so I don't have any solutions right now, but I do think it's something that we need to be mindful of. We probably need to have a conversation about addressing actually what is acceptable, when it comes to the language that some people are using. And this is certainly not just an issue for our community. I know that it's an issue for many other councils, but it is an increasing issue, and I don't think that as elected members we should also allow this to continue to grow for our staff in terms of looking after their well-being as well. So that's just another aspect that I want to highlight through, I guess, the public comments that have come through. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have a point of order from the Mayor, so I'll let you speak, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just in the very prepared statements of or comments just before from Councillor Barrett, it was quite incorrect. He said it was a unanimous decision to vote this. That is incorrect. It wasn't unanimous. I didn't vote for these parking changes.
Okay.
So could he withdraw that, please?
Councillor Barrett, I'll let you comment, but I'm not going to have a free-for-all over this.
Happy to withdraw that specific element.
Okay, that has been withdrawn, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. It's noted. Thank you.
Okay. Has everybody that wishes to speak? No one online? Okay, so I'll just wrap up with my final comments. I think most of it's been said, but one thing I will just comment on was comments about parking being in hot demand and that we have to manage it. Actually, if the parking is in such hot demand with outside these businesses, they will be the first people that will come to council to demand charging because it will be affecting their businesses. So it's not council that regulates the parking, it's the users and the businesses. And just remember that the businesses spend, the percentage of rates and the businesses in the city is huge for commercial properties and in the CBD. And they don't get a lot of, parking's about the only thing they'd get. They don't get rubbish, they have to pay for their own water. There's so many facilities that, services that they have to pay on top of their rates. So the businesses actually pay a good percentage of the rates as well, so they are entitled to certain services. So when you say it's free parking, the ratepayers get it. It's actually a lot of it comes through the businesses' rates. So they subsidise a lot of these parks, and so that that was my last comment. So we'll now go to the vote. And
Madam Chair, can I call a division?
I have already, yep, I'm just going to call a division. Thank you, Councillor.
Can I just check that your recommendations get seconded in the end?
Yes, Councillor Naylor
Thank you.
seconded them.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can we separate out D?
Yes, certainly. So we'll do that one first. So the first one we're voting for is D, and it's Sunday no paid parking hours. So ready when you are, Hannah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm taking a division on the second option, the option that was moved by Councillor Beattie and seconded by Councillor Naylor, and we're voting on D, that we have Sunday no parking hours. Councillor Butt. 4. Mayor Smith.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Naylor.
4.
Councillor Harpeter.
4.
Councillor Bowen is not here. Sorry, oh, she is here.
Down here.
Thank you. Sorry, I spoke over you. 4. Okay, thank you.
4.
Councillor Dingwall.
Against.
Councillor Beattie.
4.
Councillor Meehan.
4.
Councillor Hancock.
4.
Councillor Dennison.
4.
Councillor Petrinas.
4.
Mr Armstrong.
4.
Councillor Barrett.
Against.
Councillor Finlay.
4.
Councillor McCallard.
4.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
4.
So that is carried 15 votes for and 2 against. So we'll now go to, I'll let you read that one out, Hannah. We'll go to the next.
So on the same option, we're now voting on A, B and C, that Thursday be retained 8:30 till 5:30, Friday 8:30 till 5:30 and Saturday 11 till 3. Mr Armstrong.
For.
Councillor McCallard. Councillor Butt.
For.
Councillor Dingwall.
For.
Councillor Barrett.
Against.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
For.
Councillor Harpeter.
For.
Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Meehan.
For.
Councillor Hancock.
For.
Councillor Dennison.
For.
Councillor Petrinas.
For.
Councillor Naylor. For. Councillor Finlay.
For.
Councillor Beattie. For. Mayor Smith.
For.
Councillor Bowen.
For.
Okay. And that is carried 16 votes for and 1 against. So thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to item number 7, which is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Report, and that's on pages 292. Sorry,
Madam Chair.
yes, I just realised. Sorry, Councillor McCallard, there is an additional motion. I'll just get it put on the screen. And Councillor got the seconder, that's fine. So it's now on your screen, so it's another recommendation, item number 3, that on-street parking fees be set at $2 per hour from 1st of January 2022, and that's moved by Councillor McCallard and seconded by Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, before us, we have this recommendation. And basically, I think I'm sort of bringing this to the fore for the following reasons. When we look at the situation that we have at hand, the issue is not really the charges as such, or the fees or the tariffs, but the issue that was at hand was the fact that we changed hours and the community was not happy about those hours. Right? And before us, I think we have an opportunity to do the right thing. I think we need to be bold and think about the impacts that this can have on our city and climate change. My rationale is basically, for bringing this before you, is simply our city is growing, as was previously highlighted by Councillor Barrett earlier. Our city is growing, and our CBD is congested. And in order to reduce that congestion and also encourage people to start using for modal transportation, including walking, cycling, and even using public transport, the best way to discourage people from parking there for long hours, because remember, the reason why officers had to bring those recommendations in terms of the change of parking hours was because of the fact that they had realized after the previous lockdown there are a lot of people parking there for long periods of time, and the whole day. And my reason was simply for increasing the parking tariffs and bring it from $1.70 to $2 is simply to also diversify our streams of income or revenue and offset the loss for not charging on Sundays and also on weekends after 3 p.m. on Saturday. And quite frankly, when compared to other cities or other regional cities in New Zealand, such as Rotorua, and we look at other places like New Plymouth, for example, Dunedin, our parking fees are relatively generous. We charge $1.70. let's look at cities like Tauranga, for example, who charge $4 an hour for parking. And cities like Nelson, for example, and New Plymouth, $2 an hour. Tauranga, $2 an hour. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do the right thing. It's important for us. I mean, I think we also should be allowing ourselves, to support a push for more user pays and assist a user pays for car parking. We should move away from subsidizing car parking to a user pays. And this will encourage people to consider other options for traveling in and around our CBD. And also will go a long way in encouraging people to walk in the CBD. And also, we all know that the reason why a lot of people, our biggest carbon emissions, cars and their cars in our cities and the pollution that they're creating in our city. This will also be a positive step in addressing climate change and making sure that carbon emissions are reduced in and around our CBD. So I'll encourage councillors to support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, happy to support this for a couple of reasons. One is that it does quite nicely fill the revenue gap that we've created for ourselves. And while we understand there's some uncertainty around revenue projections, I think we would do well to stick with a system that actually delivers the best estimate of those revenue predictions as built into our long-term plan process. So this fills the gap quite nicely. But the stronger reason for this really is that we know that there's a strong relationship between the price at which parking is set, the availability of parking, and we know that there's a good relationship with turnover of parking with economic activity during daytime retail, which is when this targets. So it makes sense in terms of supporting economic vibrancy in the heart of our city, and it makes sense in terms of filling the gap in terms of our revenue. Quite happy with the choice to see it implemented from the 1st of January. I think that gets us through the Christmas period without any concerns. It gets us out of the current COVID levels that we're in. So it's a delayed implementation on the basis of that, and I'd urge you to support it for city vibrancy and to diversify council revenue.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This suggestion is obviously quite tempting insofar as that it would potentially fill a bit of the revenue gap that is as a result of the changes that have happened around hours. However, I won't be supporting this, as I think that we've just put the cost up to $1.70. It hasn't been given a good look at the potential impact of putting it up to $2, and there might be unintended consequences of this, particularly people staying out of the CBD and choosing to take their business elsewhere. I think it makes a lot more sense for us to be able to assess the impact of us already putting the charges up to $1.70 before considering any further change. We've heard that putting it up to $1.70 is the first change since 2015 in charges, and I think changing it again within a 6-month period is unreasonable. I think a comment was made by a councillor in the previous discussion, are we here to lead the city or are we being led by the city? And I think it's really important that we actually, perhaps there is a role for us to play in leading, but there's also a very significant role for us to play in listening to our community. And this is not something that we have asked the question specifically about in this consultation process. I think it would not be good process for us to suddenly impose this in this way. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say I don't disagree with the rationale expressed by the mover and seconder, but I think however you explain it at this stage, this just looks like a money grab. We haven't had a chance to assess the impact of the increase to $1.70, which is a change in process for us as well as standardising cost of parking across the central city. And so I want us to have a chance to look at that impact and review that in the manner that's already planned with that wider review before we take any further steps. So I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will not support this. So there's a couple main reasons that stick out. One is that we've just completed engagement on hours and was silent on fees. And then an 11th hour surprise start to bring up fees is I think a blow that that I'm not prepared to promote. Also talking about the money grab, I wrote down this is penny pinching. It's tattling around with something that we can leave be for now. With COVID, Christmas, and even with the promotion of the date for the new year, I still think the timing's poor. Particularly knowing, this is my second main point, is that we have a parking strategy coming up in the new year, and that way we can actually have a more thorough look and have more complete engagement with our community before we adopt policy around increasing fees in this regard. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's pretty well been covered. I will not support this recommendation. Simply, as has been pointed out, we've upped the fees to $1.70. To up it another 30 cents within the space of 6 months it's just not right. We've gone back on the increase of hours, and up the fees is just given in one hand, taken back out in the other. I just don't think it sends a good message. The comments made earlier about leadership, maybe a better move for council would be, instead of giving councillors free car parking, to give us all a bike, and we start leading the way. There's a number of ways to lead a horse to water, and I just don't think banging people is going to get the result. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this one because I am looking for compromise. I think we do need to pull some levers to get people to actually think about the reasons why they take their cars and whether it's necessary to take the car every time and drive it to every spot in front of every shop, or, you know, think about trying something different. So I'm happy to support an increase in the parking charges. And I also think that the $1.70 increase that we've already decided that we're going to do is approximately a CPI increase from the last time we changed the fees. So it's not actually increasing it in real terms all that much, but it is increasing it enough for people to start thinking about why they do the things that they do. And so I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we look at the recent engagement with the public, but I guess many of us changed our opinion, and that was due to the businesses, and especially the people who are representing big businesses and group of businesses. So even we didn't ask in the last engagement about this increased price, even then some of the people expressed this increasing price is not a problem. The main problem was the extended hours and Sunday. So for that reasons, I don't think making a difference of 30 cents an hour is a big difference, because this increase is not going to affect the elderly people or the people who are visiting the town in the evening, because after 5:30 they will be parking for free. On Sunday it will be free. So for that reason, because it is not going to affect the workers of the hospitality sector, not affecting the visitors in the evening, I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Look, there may very well be a strong rationale actually to increase the parking fee, but I have a feeling that the best thing is to actually bring this into the overall review of parking within the city, because that needs a really good airing. and we need to ensure that we've got a coherent transport strategy for the city. So I think the overall review of the parking strategy within the city will provide a better opportunity for us to consult and not make decisions on the fly. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just think this is a very problematic recommendation. It's been, 8 weeks since we increased the parking fee after several years, and there was quite a lot of comms around it because obviously at the same time we had hit pause on part of the proposal and continued with another part. We've got a parking management strategy that is needing to be reviewed, and through that we have an opportunity to actually look at parking management as a whole. Feels like we're very much tinkering in an ad hoc way by bringing this out now. We also, despite us having a very clear assumption on what the feedback was going to be, we still decided to go out for public consultation on the hours, even after having a several thousand strong petition coming into us. And so to pick and choose what we are going to consult on and what we're not going to consult on, I don't think is consistent. I would like us to actually stick to the strategy, decide, or be really clear about why we manage parking in the way that we manage parking, and that includes with our charges. And I don't think that this additional recommendation takes that into account. We have got a strategy that we're going to review. We can look at it then. We can look at all aspects of, points that are raised through submissions and other concerns such as, the hours and those kind of things in a holistic way. But I feel like this is a very bitsy approach to just sort of pick off little bits 8 weeks after we've just amended the parking fee. So I won't be supporting this at this point in time. However, would be happy to look at this in a wider context, and also probably would not be happy to cycle in from Ashurst every day.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would certainly not be supporting councillors cycling. I would have great difficulty at the moment making any meeting, so I won't be supporting that. I'm sorry, Councillor Meehan. We've just gone out and consulted with the public about the parking, and I've spoken to a lot of people in our community, and I'd say every councillor has over this subject, even in my own household. And for suddenly to bring in an extra 30 cents an hour with no one's been consulted on, no one's known about it, where everyone begrudgingly is willing to accept the $1.70, I think would be like putting a box, a lighter or a match into a box of firecrackers and see what happens. So I certainly will not support it, because I don't think anyone in our community would be very happy at all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry, I'm still laughing at Councillor Finlay's analogy. Look, I won't be supporting this, and I'll just take you back to when we made the decision to go out and consult on this parking issue after Jerry presented the petition. And at that point, there was a discussion about whether or not we would consult on the increase in charges as well as the increased hours. And I can remember speaking to that and saying, look, the majority of the feedback seems to be about the extended hours. People seem to, albeit they're not delighted about an increase in charges, but people seem to accept that the increased charge was reasonable. And so, if I remember correctly, and of course, it's open to the Mayor or anyone else to correct me if I get this wrong, but I seem to recall that myself and the Deputy Mayor moved an amendment that we would just consult on extended hours, not on fees. And so, at this stage, to now bring in an additional increase in fees, I think would be seen by the public as a breach of trust. We did not go out to consult on fees. People commented about hours. People were prepared to accept the increase in fees. At this stage, I think the public would take a very dim view of us increasing fees without having consulted on fees. And it would seem like we had somehow sneakily decided to increase the fees if they didn't want the increased hours. An honest way of going about this would have been to consult on fees. So at this stage, I'm not prepared to agree on an increase in fees. And I do want to just mention a concept called social licence, which is about, you can only do things, whether you're a business or a local government or a government, you can really only do things that people agree with. Ultimately, even if you think yourself that, and I do think this, that people should be using their cars less, and that restricting parking might encourage people to use their cars less, you can't impose restrictions on a community that they're not prepared to accept. And this is the situation that we found ourselves in. And so whatever we might wish for, we cannot do it because people don't want it. And so if we want to change people's behaviour around parking and use of cars, which I absolutely accept we need to do, we need to do it in a way that we bring people along with us. Because this kind of what appears to be sort of random restrictions imposed on people does not go down well, and we've learnt that. So let's not pick another fight with the public about parking fees. Let's humbly admit that the extended hours were not acceptable to the majority of people. Let's not go back on the extended hours. We've agreed not to do that. And let's not, at the last minute, increase the fees as well. Because, as I say, I think the public will take a very dim view of it.
I have no further questions. No one's out comments. So we'll go for final comment from you, Councillor Michelard.
Oh, thank you very much, councillors, for your comments and the feedback provided. But I just wanted to, I think, just for the record, just to refute some of the arguments being made here today, especially coming from across with Councillor Vaughan Dennison, when you mentioned that it's a money grab. Personally, I do not think it's a money grab. It is an opportunity for us to nudge people to move on to more sustainable ways of transportation. And also, we need to use the words of Councillor Johnson, to be aspirational and think, and have a bigger vision of diversifying our sources of revenue. This is an opportunity for us to sort of diversify our sources of income or our sources of revenue. We've just heard from officers and our chief financial officer stating that, in order to make up for the losses that we're going to make for not changing hours, we'll take 30 cents to offset that pricing or that amount. And I thought that 30 cents, in as much as we have not consulted on that, but 30 cents is a compromise, like Councillor Dingwall would just say. It's a compromise in the fact that we did not go with what the community did not want us to go with, which was the extended hours. But we are seeking a compromise to say, let's remain, okay, we voted to remain with the status quo, but let's seek a compromise by raising it by another 30 cents in order to offset the loss of not charging during the proposed hours. And personally, I believe in a user pay system. I believe that we should think of creative ways of generating income and not just through rates. I believe that we should also operate as a business, user pays, and encouraging and moving towards a user pay ethos. And this is an opportunity this is actually an opportunity for us to do it. And also, when we think about the issue of climate change, let's talk about it for a little bit. A reduction in private vehicle traveling could contribute positively to the impact this travel has on carbon emission, water quality, air, and biodiversity. In order to stop, or in order to encourage a high turnover as expressed by the business community, and I'm for businesses, I am for the churches. But in order for us to encourage a high turnover, we don't do it by building more car parks to accommodate more cars. We do it by discouraging. In order, if we are to fulfill our eco-city strategy, we do it by, I think the best way for us to go ahead with this is to raise it to the point, to raise it to $2. And this will discourage certain people from parking for parking in the CBD, and actually decide, okay, let me park, let's say on Ada Street, and then walk into the CBD. This is not a money grab, but it's actually when we think of the bigger picture, we think about economic development in terms of diversifying our streams of income. We think about climate change, reducing our emission. We're not forcing people not to come into the city in the car, but we are trying to encourage them to use sustainable modes of transportation, encourage them to go more on buses. And we do that by having an efficient bus system that works returnally. So I think as leaders, or community leaders, we need to be bold in our approach. I remember Councillor Johnson once mentioning when the Chamber of Commerce made a submission on this very particular issue. And she said, do we need to be afraid every time the Chamber of Commerce says something and change our minds on it? Do we need to consult the community on this? These were the very same words that she used on that day when we had this meeting in particular. And sometimes leadership requires us to take hard decisions and difficult decisions. Sometimes we have to take the public where they don't want us to go in order to improve and make change in society. That's leadership. So I'll maintain my position, and I'll encourage us to vote and support this motion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. We will now go to vote.
Can we have a division, please?
Yes, we will do it by division. I'll get you to read out. Thank you, Hannah.
On the motion before you, councillors, that on-street parking fees be set at $2 per hour from 1st of January 2020. Councillor Petrinas.
Against.
Councillor Bowen.
Against.
Councillor Finlay.
Against.
Councillor Dingwall.
For.
Mayor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Meehan.
Against.
Councillor Beattie.
Against.
Councillor Harpeter.
Against.
Councillor McCallard.
For.
Councillor Hancock.
Against.
Mr Armstrong.
Against.
Councillor Butt.
For.
Councillor Dennison.
Against.
Councillor Barrett.
For.
Councillor Naylor.
Against.
Councillor Johnson.
Against.
Deputy Mayor Rutherford.
Against.
Thank you. And that is lost 4 votes for, 13 against. Right, we'll now move on to item number 7, which is page 292, which is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Report. And we have Ellen Downs and Wayne Wilson. So ready when you are, gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This one. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. The report before you, I'd like just to start by just picking up the notifiable highlights and then pointing out one change that we made regarding manual handling in the report. The executive team visited 3 sites over the last quarter. One was the library, the Awapuni Recovery Centre, and also the wastewater treatment plant.
Now, these site visits provide insight for the executive leadership team and also an awareness of how effective the system is working in those sites, and also provides opportunity to hear about continuous or continual improvement. It's proved positive from the site feedback, something that we're going to continue doing. The second one is the Safe Plus audit, which is the first safety culture audit we've had at the Palmerston North City Council, and probably the first group-wide in-depth audit. Focus on the safety culture is the depth of individual interviews that take place, and also the depth of focus group meetings that take place. Deep dive into not just work as perceived, but it dives into work as done. The result of the audit report will provide visibility, or has provided visibility, on the current safety culture level, and it provides a baseline for us going forward. So it's a first positive for us from the perspective of safety culture for the Palmerston North City Council. And the last one regarding notifiable highlights is just the ongoing refreshing of the employee participation. And we've settled in the two different committees now, with 23 health and safety reps now with the Officers Health and Safety Committee, and 13 at the depot, which is a really good ratio right across Palmerston North City Council. The last thing here was regarding the change to the manual handling report. As requested last month, I've added in the 12-month moving average, which will take out the spikes and the dips that we see through the quarterly reporting, and hopefully it is meaningful for you. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alan. First up for questions, we have Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your report. My question is around the comment about, or the reference to a change program, taking into account the outstanding audit actions from 2018 in the culture report. So specifically, what is the plan to set that change program up for success? If you could perhaps comment on the governance and management structure, and also the resourcing that will be applied to making that change program work. What's management's thinking on that currently?
Madam Chair, may I respond? It's Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Through you, Madam Chair. The background to the change programme has been, as much as in the past 12 months, we've noticed positive improvements in our report on a number of elements, whether that's in our reporting and on our lost time injuries. We do note that we've still got work to do from the 2018 audit, and we're not comfortable that the approach we're taking is that with the approach we have taken to date is reaping all of the results that we want. So what we have initiated 2 months ago now was working with externals and reaching across our organisation to help us understand how the system is actually working for people, to help us as an organisation identify the vision that we have for health, safety and well-being at PNCC, and then make sure we've got very clear aspirations that we can then subsequently hang off the right programmes of work to achieve, as opposed to simply taking an audit observation and saying, well, we're going to close this action. And I guess, as I've mentioned to you before, there are many audit actions that we might be able to close mechanically by saying something didn't exist in the past, it now exists. What we're really interested in is, does the system actually make our people safer, healthier and more well at work? The questions on governance and resources, so that work is in the final stages now in terms of what the safety change programme will look like, and it will be coming to finance and audit once management have appropriately challenged it and are comfortable with the direction.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So we will get a chance to look at how that change program has been set up, governed and resourced.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then my second question in relation to the report, if I may, is I note the incident around working from height. I also note another 2 incidents around excavation. And I guess my question is, what do we have to change in terms of how we're responding and dealing to these sorts of incidents to lift the awareness and actually stop them happening? They seem to me to be high-risk incidents. We should have zero tolerance for a failure to follow process and procedure. So could you just outline how we're changing behaviours and reducing the risk of these incidents happening in the future?
Again, through you, Madam Chair. One of the most significant changes that we've taken, I would say, probably in the past 9 months, is to make sure that our post-incident actions are inclusive and that they are conducted in an environment which is relentless at trying to identify the root cause, but equally so makes it a safe environment where people don't feel management are simply looking for someone to blame. And that is definitely giving some great insight for us. And I would quote, we've experienced a number of line strikes, more than we would want to, but the most recent line strike and the very thorough post-incident investigation, actually all of the procedures and protocols were followed. The team did everything that they should do. They identified the issues and the markings in the road. We had standoff capability come up and try and interpret the maps. And it is as simple as, sometimes when you're peeling into the earth, what you find underneath the earth is not what's marked. And so whilst we did experience a line strike, it was in our view, and again, we had external support in this, we had followed every procedure to try and prevent it from happening. And we followed all of our SOPs when it did happen to make sure our people were safe. So I wouldn't want the Finance and Audit Committee to think in any way that we are complacent or management accepts complacency, particularly in critical risk areas. But I would want to help frame our expectations in general, that whether you work in the utility sector, whether you work in local government, anyone that's disrupting what's underneath the earth, it is a bit of a minefield. And sometimes, and what we've found is, even when we follow all of the procedures, which are recognised as best practice by the people that do the work, we're still going to have some incidents from time to time. The most important thing is that when it happens, the impact on our people or on the public is not severe. So what we are not experiencing is a serious injury to ourselves and the members of the public, and that is a positive.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Wayne and Alan. I'm looking at page 303 and 304 at the dashboard, and I'm just wondering if you can explain to me, I guess, the definition around near miss versus critical when it comes to incidents, because I'm looking at some of the, I guess, the critical incidents where a car rolled into a gutter, so nobody was damaged, versus people throwing rocks at staff, and some of them are near misses and some of them are misses, or clipping cyclists at a roundabout, but that's still considered a near miss, even though clip would indicate there was contact. So can I understand what the definitions are for a near miss versus a critical, and I guess where the threshold is to move one into the other?
Yeah, near miss from a purist perspective is if an incident happens and if seconds had passed previously, someone would have been seriously hurt, but someone got out of the way, that is considered a near miss. So it's a lucky that no one was injured scenario. An incident is where something does happen and we can say, yes, there was some sort of repercussion as a result, an injured person, property damage, that type of thing. That's the purest definition. If there's some anomalies here that should be in the others, that's fine, we can move those.
Okay. In terms of when it comes to the reporting or categorising for this report, is it one person that's determining whether they're a near miss or a critical, or is that, what's the process, I guess, to determine when a incident is, or something, a situation is highlighted, what's the process to determine where it falls into, and do we have an internal process where there's someone else has got an opinion over it or eyes, or is it just up to one person to determine where that threshold sits?
Well, we have two approaches. One is how it's entered into the system. So if it goes through as a near miss, it's entered as a near miss into the system. If it's entered as an incident, it's entered in the system that way. But from the perspective of an eye over it before the report, I tend to do an eye over it. The critical risk area, one thing we don't have on it, which we need to improve, is we've identified the critical risks in about 2018, and what they called bow tie exercise was done. But the exercise didn't cover parameters around what should be reported under those critical risks. So there is a gap, and it's something we need to close so we can tighten up the parameters. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, so just to
excuse me, Deputy Mayor.
Sarah, sorry, it's Sarah Sinclair here. Could I just add to that, please?
Yes, Sarah, I've got you.
Just to also add that every week at the infrastructure lead team, we go through all of the incidents in infrastructure and with Alan, and go through whether or not, so as well as Alan checking it, we go through every week, go through whether or not we think they are genuine near misses or incidents, and also how we're going to make sure that we get consistency about the reporting, but also that we get consistency about how we react to them, and that we understand what the closeout process is, and whether it's something that's to Patrick's point, just something that's happened with all the processes, or something that we need to learn from. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Deputy Mayor, you can continue.
Thank you. So just to, going back, I just want to clarify then that I've understood. So if a staff member, so for example, the car rolling into the gutter, a staff member has identified that as a critical incident, and then they log it into the system, and then it goes through either, I guess, these meetings that Sarah's just identified, or to determine that that status of critical remains.
Yeah, predominantly, yes. Yeah.
And then just my second question was, in the responses to some of these, where it's identified things like further training, for example, de-escalation training, and then that training is undertaken, do we have a level of quality assurance through the delivery side? So have we got somebody who is going and checking that actually the de-escalation training that may have been delivered is actually sufficient to the role, or is it just de-escalation training's been completed, that box is ticked?
The de-escalation training has been selected for different roles because of the risks and dangers they face, and so it's already been qualified, even prior to us actually, prior to the incident. So if somebody needs a refresher, or they haven't had the de-escalation training, then it is actually it's booked in for them.
Alan, Patrick's going to come on and comment. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, but just to be clear, my de-escalation was just the example. That's not actually the concern or the question.
Okay.
Understood.
Through you, Madam Chair, just 2 points in response to the Deputy Mayor's question. The first is, obviously, one of the things we really want to encourage is reporting. And certainly I understand there's an awful lot of different definitions that I need to be reminded on all of the time. So it is really important, and we tell our people that we'd like you to report instances. We do provide them with some training and with some guides. But fundamentally, one of the sort of quality steps that we take to make sure if an individual has recorded something as a near miss or used one of the other categories, we do have this quality step as we get into the investigation to make sure we're using the right category to record the event. So I guess what I'm saying is we tell our people to please report it, and if you're not sure exactly what category it is, don't worry about it, because our QA process will kick the tires on that and will ultimately make sure that we're recording it as appropriately as we can. In terms of the question on de-escalation training, and I recognise that that's just an example, it's a really useful example because de-escalation training for my colleagues that deal with sometimes challenging customers on the phone obviously has quite a different flavour, look and feel to my colleagues that keep our people safe by enforcing parking or animal control. So we do have a range of different providers, and we do try and tailor the needs of the offering to the needs of the person in the role. One of the things that we are looking at improving on is being very proactive in evaluating the effectiveness of the training and how fit for purpose it is in the role that people complete. So as we avoid this, here with changing something, we can take our records, it's fine. So we absolutely do try and make sure training is fit for role, and we are looking at steps to try and be really proactive and evaluate the effectiveness.
Thank you, Patrick.
That's answered perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Alan, for the report. Had a couple of questions around Section G, which is the well-being side of the report. Around the people feedback side of things, can you just remind me what frequency that information is collected at?
This survey took place about 2 years ago, and we haven't done a formal survey since until the one we did about a month ago, which is through the change program, health and safety change. So we added in these two same questions again to ensure, just to see what sort of if there'd be any variance to the actual initial report. So we just done one recently, so 2 years ago then and now this, but we'd like to do it annually if we can.
Thank you for that. Can I just clarify in terms of, you said you'd like to do it annually if you can, sort of, is that still an open question, or is there intent to move to an annual basis?
Well, it's something we'd have to work through with my boss, etc. But normally this is
Alan, I'll get Patrick wants to respond again, so he's very helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just a point of clarification, the people feedback survey is not 2 years old, it's 1 year old. The question was asked as part of a wider organisational culture survey. And as Alan said, we have repeated the survey questions as part of the safety change programme. We will absolutely be getting that data point at least annually. And the only variable is to see if we can try and integrate all of the different insight we want from our people. So as instead of going out in multiple different forums in multiple different times, which quite frankly just gets frustrating and challenging for people, if we can join it up so as we're asking the people for the insight that we'd like at the right time and at the right intervals, that we can use it.
Great, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Alan, for kicking off that response. So with this people feedback side of things, are we collecting participation rates as well, and can participation rates be reported alongside?
Yes, we did collect participation rates, and we can report it alongside.
Thank you. And finally, Madam Chair, if I can just understand sort of one notch up in that table, the references around VTE contacts, and I guess what sort of things are captured within a contact. Is it, hey, how's it going text? Is it an actual conversation, phone call? Like what's a contact?
VTE staff are on site for a period of time each week, and so a contact is a physical conversation. That's how it's recorded. The other is that people contact them by phone or by email or text or whatever, and they respond to that. Oops. Sorry. Is that better? Okay. So, yeah. Does that answer the question, Councillor Barrett?
Yes, thank you. So just then to understand, are there ultimately some limits sort of in terms of, I guess I'm trying to understand how much of this is an indicator of well-being versus an indicator of how much time Vitae is actually contracted to be here.
Oh, sorry. The purpose of Vitae, I suppose, is to give people an ability to discuss something with people who are not council employees. So that's the purpose of it. And they're contracted to be here a certain number of hours per week. So the number of contacts probably is more of the measure that you would have on what's going on in the organisation. A lot of them are positive contacts, they're not all, it's not just negative contacts.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for the report. Just firstly, on that same page 297, under the wellbeing table, there is a record of annual flu vaccinations there. And I'm just wondering, with the national rollout of the COVID vaccination, is there any intention to measure or report percentage of PNCC staff who are COVID vaccinated?
This is an ongoing discussion, I think, nationwide on whether it's something that employers... the Chief Executive.
Chief Executive will answer that question. Hello, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. As Wayne has alluded, this is an ongoing conversation. We have asked staff who are vaccinated if they wish to have that recorded. At the moment, we are leaving it to them to make that choices whether they want to or not. I certainly have, and that is recorded, and many of my staff have chosen to do that. We are encouraging people to vaccinate. In my weekly updates to staff, we are constantly reminding them that that is open to them, and we encourage them to do so. We are looking and discussing further what other measures we can take in order to ensure that our staff are safe, but also the public are safe as well.
Thank you. And just further to that, based on the number of staff currently who are happy to report whether they're vaccinated or not, is that something that will be reported to us, or are you able to give an indication of how that's tracking?
I can't give you an indication of that, but certainly anecdotally, staff have been taking up that opportunity to vaccinate.
Okay.
And we've also encouraged them to have their families vaccinated as well.
Thank you, that's great. And just on the same table, just moving to a different point, there is, in the sick leave days, it's got a number for the quarter and for the year to date, and then there's a calculation there, 3,716 divided by 600 is 8. And I'm just wanting to understand what that's referring to. Is that 8% sick rate, or what? I don't quite understand that calculation and what that's meant to be telling us.
Yeah, I'm trying to find what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Is it 8 days per person?
Yeah, the result is 8 days per person is the outcome.
8 days per person per
so,
year.
Yeah, so the 3,716 was the annual, divided by the 600 equals 8 days per person.
Okay, thanks for that. And just looking down at the graph underneath that tracks the sick leave days and a couple of other things on that graph over the past 9 months. I mean, that appears that the sick leave days have reduced slightly over the last 9 months. Have you got data to give us an indication of how the sick leave days compare to last year or the year before, or because obviously the last 9 months we're in unusual times at the moment, and it would be good to have a bit of a baseline of what that used to look like to compare that to.
We can do that.
Thank you. And just one final question, a couple of pages down, page 299, the turnover section, outlining the turnover rate being 18%. At a recent meeting, it was reported that there were 140 vacancies in the organisation, and I see there's a bullet point there that says that in the last quarter there's been 38 candidates to new roles and new positions in Palmerston or PNCC. So I'm just...
Sorry, this may be a question that Patrick may want to answer.
So I haven't quite got to the question.
Oh, sorry, Councillor.
But the question is, do we have an understanding of what the current vacancies are based on it as compared to what was recently reported to us?
So is it something, Patrick, that you would wish to answer?
Yes, I just want to clarify that the report's obviously for a period of time. So what we're reporting on that is the quarter that's relevant. My recollection as of last week is that we have a total number of vacancies of approximately 130, of which 40 are being managed. And what I mean by that is that's where management at this time is not seeking to replace them. There's a number of reasons for that. And of the remainder, we have 22 appointments that have been made, but people have yet to take the post. And we have 50 that are active in recruitment at the minute. So what we are seeing is in recent weeks, I think it's actually 22 appointments in the past 2 weeks. So we're starting to see more people joining us, as those recruitment processes obviously have a bit of a longer time than people's notice. And so we would expect to see those vacancy numbers decrease over the months ahead.
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry, I didn't catch the first. So there's 130 vacancies, and then there was a number of those that we're not recruiting to. What was the number? Was that 40?
So there are approximately 40 which are currently classified as managed vacancies, and so there's a range of reasons why management might not go straight to market. And of the remainder, as I said, there are 22 appointments that have been made, but the people have yet to start to start work, and the remainder are at active recruitment.
So, sorry, maybe when you said 40, as in 40, so
yes,
it just doesn't add up to 130. So, and I was just trying to understand. Perhaps could you explain a little bit more why those 40 vacancies aren't being recruited to?
The CE, Patrick, the CE will pick that one up.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, the actual number of roles that we have on hold at the moment are 25. And there's a number of reasons why we keep roles on hold. One of the reasons is that and since I have arrived, I have been actively managing our employee numbers and ensuring that when people leave that we just don't automatically recruit, that we're actually looking at every role that we have in the organisation, and we are saying, are they an essential role? Do we need them at this time? Are there other ways that we can do things? Now, some are very obvious of why you would want to replace somebody immediately, but others you actually do want to take that opportunity to think about it. And that is a really important part of how you actively manage your staffing budgets. And so that's the sort of things that we do. There's also other ways of doing it. It might be that you want to contract a resource in temporarily because you know that you can't get people on those sorts of roles in the market. It may be that there are different ways of doing things, or there are other people within the organisation that you want to bring through into those roles. So we are always assessing that, and that is a part of how we actively manage also our recruitment budgets.
Thank you. Can I just ask a further question to that? So if that's a strategy to actively manage staff budget, I'm just wanting to know, are all positions funded through our annual budget?
Yes. I don't know, is that a trick question?
Well,
no.
Yes. Perhaps the answer is that this is a dynamic organisation and it's pretty large, and there are different ways of doing things. And sometimes it's smart to use staff, and sometimes it's smart to use consultants or professionals. And so I think the answer is we have an annual budget for staff. It doesn't always align with the number of people that's the most efficient way of delivering stuff. And so occasionally we'll have a need, we'll decide, I suppose, that delivering a service is easier done with in-house people than it is with with external people. So I think the challenge is that a budget is a locked point in time at the best assumptions at the time. As the year goes on, the organisation is dynamic, and this is the point Heather's making. I suspect when we talk about the 25 that are not currently being actively recruited, they're on hold while we establish whether it's a good idea to have staff or a good idea to deliver those services some other way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, I am going to break now for morning tea. I can't handle any more masks. So we will come back in 15 minutes. So what that makes it at 10:50. And then when we come back, Councillor Harpeter, you'll be next, and Councillor Barrett and anybody else that wants to ask any questions. So thank you. We'll adjourn for 15 minutes. Well, I knew it. Sorry? Oh. Okay, everybody's back, so we're good to go again. And just have our CE will just make another comment. There's something she wants to add.
Yes, by way of also clarification around the on-hold roles, I just wanted to clarify that some of those roles will be on hold because we are recruiting the manager of those roles, so in those areas. So that is particularly the case in people and performance, where we've stood up whole new areas, and we will be recruiting the manager first, and then those that are direct reports to that will come after that.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Harpeta. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks,
Yes.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Alan and Wayne, for the report. My first question goes back to, I do want to talk about the table that's on the wellbeing table. So, which is on page, trying to find the page numbers. Anyway, the wellbeing table, and it might be a Patrick question. You talked about the cultural audit. I just want to identify which of the people feedback items refers to the cultural audit.
Patrick, did you want to answer that?
Yes, please, through you, Madam Chair. So on the wellbeing table, the people feedback questions, the 2 questions under that were part of it. It wasn't a cultural audit, it was a cultural survey.
So if we were trying to benchmark it from last year, and there was a benchmark for last year, how do we know how we are comparing and tracking compared to last year?
So if I think if I understand your question correctly, last year we did a cultural survey, and in that cultural survey we included 2 questions, one around physical harm and one around bullying, racism and harassment. And then what we did this year as part of the Safety Change Programme, where we surveyed our people to give their views on how on the relative priority they felt we had on health, safety and wellbeing, we asked the same questions this year.
And so is there a benchmark score, that's probably my question, that can compare the 2 years against each other?
Well, given that last year was the first year that we asked that specific question, that would be our benchmark, and what obviously we'll be driving for is saying where do we want to get to from that score. So there's no, the culture survey questions that we asked didn't have like an industry benchmark that said you should look to have this amount or this amount. So it was a question that we specifically added last year because we wanted to know how our people felt about those two facets.
I'm not interested in the industry survey. I'm only really interested in what's happening in our staff members' workplace. So yeah, it's really going from one year to the next year, and just knowing what the feeling is in this workplace from 1 year to the next. Really, that's really what I'm interested in. Okay, that's the first question. Second question is to, I'm not sure who to, but the turnover of 18.1. What departments is that in mainly?
Across the whole org. So there's some that have.
Who's been hit harder?
Well, yeah, every department has had turnover. It's I haven't got it in front of me. It's not completely consistent, but all departments have experiencing turnover.
So you're saying it's across the company?
Yeah, it's not exactly even across the organisation, of course, and it'll go up and down, but it's significant in all departments.
Patrick, did you want to comment on that?
I was just going to add, through you, Madam Chair, that one of the things that the executive team looks at periodically is the detail that sits beneath that numbers, and there's certainly no trend that's allowing us to think we need to focus anything particularly in one segment or another.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is around ACC. I asked this 3 months ago. Have we got any indication on ACC payments and the ACC level, with the level of accidents that we're having? it's an indicator. So it's just really wanting to know what is the level of ACC payments that are coming out now with the level of accidents that we're having.
Who would like to answer that?
I can respond to that one after the meeting
Okay.
about what our levy is at the moment.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. So Wayne will contact you offline about that one, councillor.
But Madam Chair, I asked 3 months ago and I never got a response. So maybe I need to put a recommendation up because I got nothing from last time either. So I did ask 3 months ago.
Oh, sorry.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'll certainly look into that and will action it. I know, and I'm happy to take offline a discussion with Councillor Happiter to understand exactly what we're seeking to get from ACC that we're not getting through our lost time injury data. So we will follow up by Friday this week to all councillors on whatever that number is. But I'd be keen to explore a little bit more whether we should be using broader data sets. So I will do that offline.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Right, are you finished, councillor?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to put my hand down.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Hothita actually covered the question that I had.
Okay, right. Now, I have no further questions. Is there any further questions before I go to the... No? So thank you very much, gentlemen. We will now move on to the recommendation. And I'll read out the recommendation that the memorandum titled Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report, April to June 2021, presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on the 22nd of September 2021, be received for information. I'm happy to move that. Seconder, Councillor Barrett. Thank you very much for the report. It's getting more and more detailed as we go through, so I'm really happy with the level of information that we are getting, so commendations for that. Councillor Barrett, you want to speak?
Just briefly to also commend the officers and team for continually improving this report. I think it's now giving us the sorts of insights that we've been after and really appreciate the extra effort that's gone into that. It's noted.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I think this is perhaps the first time I haven't had to ask a question on the health and safety report. And I really want to commend Alan and Wayne for the improvement in the report that's occurred over time. The improvement has been in a number of ways. Yes, the report's more detailed, but it's also more comprehensive. And one thing that I've really appreciated is some of the visual reporting and some of the attempts to make the raw data more understandable, like the rolling averages. And I particularly am impressed by the very sort of open and responsive attitude that the officers have to any suggestion or question from an elected member about something that could be amended or done differently in the report, and then the next time the report comes out, there it is. So I think that's really to be commended, and so a bouquet to the officers involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo the comments of others already in regards to the quality of the report. It's really gives a lot of really good information. I think it's, and the ongoing concern I guess I have and have expressed before is watching that the high turnover, which is acknowledged that that's higher than is ideal, but that having a high turnover in combination with high level of vacancies sort of exacerbates that concern in terms of the lack of knowledge, the potential for that to affect workload of staff and also productivity of staff. I think, it was good to get some answers to some of the questions, but I think there's, there might be some good reasons for having positions on hold at times, but I wouldn't like to see high levels of roles being on hold simply to manage staff budget, particularly when we approve a budget over a year that funds a certain amount of positions. I certainly wouldn't like to see that that used as a way of. I think we just I think we just need to be very careful in the way that we, look at the vacancies, and I certainly would like to see that level of vacancies come down, and I'd also like to see the turnover come down. But aside from that, overall, that's some really good report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, councillor. Are there any further comments? I haven't got anybody else in the queue, nobody on the screen. Okay, councillors, so we'll now vote by show of hands. So all those in favour? And so that's unanimous. Okay, so that is carried unanimously. So we'll now move on to item number 8, which is the Treasury report till the end of June 2021. And we have Steve presenting, Steve Patterson. Thank you, Steve. You've been waiting patiently there. Ready when you are. No, he's not on yet. You're right.
A few months. Normally, this report would have come to a month back, so some things have happened since then. And you would normally have had it in conjunction with the quarterly performance report for the council. So, in your minds would have been things like the level of capital expenditure and the like that the council's incurred for the year. So, just make one or two brief comments, given that this report covers the whole of the 12 months. At budget time, the council had assumed we would need nearly $36 million worth of additional debt to fund the capital program. As it turned out, because the program wasn't able to be achieved to that full level, we had $24 million roughly of additional debt. We'd budgeted for an interest expense of about $5.5 million, and in the end, the net interest cost was about $4.7 million. Some of that reduction was due to a lower interest rate than we budgeted. So on average, the interest rate for the year worked out at about 2.9%, compared with our budget assumption of 3.4%. The rest of the reduction was due to the fact that we had the lower debt levels. In terms of the Treasury function, it performed during the year within the policy parameters that there are in the Treasury policy and within the limits that are set within that policy. Obviously, some key components of the Treasury function include making sure we have funds available when they're required to pay the bills. And so that involves a number of things, including being conscious of when work's to be done. And I guess that's one of the more difficult parts of the process at the moment, with the uncertainties about when work is actually going to be done, when the money is actually going to be received. And so then working out when's the best time to draw funds to arrange for money from the funding institutions. A key part as well of the function is about managing key relationships with the likes of Standard & Poor's Global, our credit agency, with our key funders, the local government funding agency and the banks, and others that are involved in that whole process. So from my perspective, I believe we've got very good relationships with all of those parties. And so they respond in a way that enables us as the council to have a AA credit rating. We were able to get the funds when they were required and at a price that is an appropriate price in the marketplace at the time. So all of those things are important and contribute to the council being able to perform as you'd expect. I think the market continues to change, and obviously part of the process is trying to balance how much we borrow and when, at what rate we raise it, and whether or not we fix it or have it floating. And with the market changing the way it is, we're always making calls about that with advice that we get from our retained Treasury advisors. So I think that's about all I need to say in terms of intro.
Okay, we'll open for questions. So first up, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Steve. So I've got a question about the bullet point on page 308 around projected debt levels that exclude debt assigned for the Three Waters programme to make sure the council's not overhedged.
Yep.
If, for example, all of those
Yep.
borrowings are transferred over in 2024. But isn't there a risk? I mean, there's a risk in doing that as well, isn't there? That council could be underhedged, and that as interest rates go up, we would then be paying more for our finances?
Yes, absolutely. And so we're striking what we think is an appropriate balance between those things, trying to make sure that we're not underhedged, assuming the water's stayed, but not overhedged if they move off. So it's a call that we're having to make about just what's that appropriate balance, and that's why we're taking those two, or at least two or three different views and perspectives of the forecasts to balance just quite which step we take, and we're always reviewing that in the light of what's happening in the market at the time.
Now, I understand that, but I also see then in the bullet point below that you said that at the moment we're at the policy minimum.
Yes.
So are you happy that the policy minimum is in the right place? Because if you want to hedge even less, are you not a bit stuck if you're already against the bottom of the policy minimum?
Well, I think the yes and no. One of the graphs, the last couple, try to show that and show the extent to where that's falling. And at the moment, we did take some more swaps since the start of the year to balance that and raise that level a bit so that we weren't so near the minimum. So that's changed since the 30th of June. And we've also raised some additional funds. Well, I guess it's more not about hedging, but more about making sure we can have the money available at an appropriate price, and raised funds in advance of when they're required next year. So you're right. At the moment, the policy advice is still to be at the lower end of the scale in terms of the minimums, but we are looking at that very closely all the time just to make sure.
So if you felt that the policy minimum needed to be changed, you would just bring back a paper to council, would you, to do that?
I think there's a large range there for us in terms of how much scope we've got between the minimum and the max, and so it's a matter of judgment about whether we thought we would, if we thought it was prudent and appropriate, we'd be running it not so close to the minimum as we would otherwise do. So there's scope for us to do that in what we think is an appropriate way.
Yes, sorry. What I meant was, given that we're at the bottom, given that we're at the minimum, if you felt that we needed to be even lower than the policy would allow,
yes,
what's the process for doing that? Do you just bring a paper back to council, or is the consultation, how long, what's the kind of, how responsive are we to making those sorts of changes?
There is some scope in the policy to enable us to make short-term changes over a period, so the policy copes with allowing us to do that. But if we thought there was a longer-term requirement and that we needed to move things below what the policy was saying, which is unlikely because the policy is reasonably enabling in that respect. So we would have to bring it back through and have an amended Treasury policy, which can be done through council resolution.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Butt. Okay. Mr Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Steve, for the report and presentation, which is clear. My question's similar to Councillor Johnson's question around policy minimums for managing our interest rate exposure. And I guess, Steve, I'm just interested in what the House view on interest rates is and what would trigger a move from that policy minimum setting currently. What is your current thinking on that?
Well, as I mentioned, I rely heavily on external Treasury advice. We retain specific advisors in this field, and so we meet regularly, at least monthly, to talk about our strategy and the like. And so it's, and if things happen within that time frame, we communicate and make judgments about what the market's doing and whether or not we should be advancing our thinking in terms of the level of cover. But so that happened early in July when our discussions, we went through and looked ahead to the projected debt levels and decided it would be appropriate, not only just so that we could remain within policy, but at least have a little bit more freeboard above the minimums by raising some further swaps. So I think we don't have a particular line that we draw in the sand as to where we would what would make us move, but it's responsive to the market at a particular time and the advice that I'm obtaining.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions, councillors? The one on the screen. Okay, so thank you very much, Steve. You may step down. So I'll go to the recommendation. And the recommendation is that the council performance of council's treasury activity for the 12 months ending the 30th of June 2021 be noted. I'm happy to move that. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. It's good to see that our borrowings are a lot less, but unfortunately our borrowings are less because we haven't completed some of the capital projects. So this is nothing unusual for year to year, so I'm comfortable at where we're sitting. Is there any further comments? There's no further comments, so I'm happy to take the vote by hand. So all those in favour? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. We will now move to the work schedule, which is on page 317. Right, I am happy to move the work schedule. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Are there any questions or comments around the work schedule? Anybody online? Okay. Okay, so we're fine. So I'm happy to move that the Finance and Audit Committee receive its work schedule dated the September 2021. All those in favour, put your hand up, please. And people on, we can't see. We're just waiting for the screen to come up so I can see the people online. Right, so yes, they're all in favour, so that is carried unanimously. So that is the end of part one. So we are now going to move into part two. So I'd like to move that the public be excluded from the following reports, and that is items 11, 12, 11, which is the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee, 12, Ariana Reserve request to return land to a developer, and 13, assurance report on safety, review of health and safety, and that's because of legal privilege and negotiations in safety and health. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. So that we'll vote for that. Is there any comments before we vote? Nobody online? So we'll raise your hand if you've... So that is carried unanimously. So we'll just wait to set up to go into part 2. So we'll do that in a couple of minutes.